welcome and thank you all for joining us. This is our first national and regional commentary of the Quarterly Economic Survey in partnership with BDO. My name is Paul Britton. I'm Chief Executive for Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. I'm delighted to see that we've got a really broad range of sectors that are represented on the session today. The three lions effect doesn't seem to have hit us too much. In fact, one of our panelists will remain nameless, and he's made it to the gym this morning. Activity is continuing. So sectors I can see that are represented that perhaps you can't are life sciences, professional services, logistics, software and technology, and automotive. So we've got to name a few. So we've got a broad range of sectors represented, and that's important. So for those of you that are familiar with the Chamber, you'll know that we are one of the largest chambers of commerce in the UK, fifth largest by the number of employees represented. This is a document that, if you remember, you may well recognise. This is our business manifesto. It sets out the priorities for the region and what you can expect from us, your chamber, on your behalf. And this, the QES, has to be one of the most important pieces of work that the chamber can do on your behalf, because every survey helps to inform our lobbying into government. And moving forwards, we want to make sure that this session helps to inform your investment decisions as well as we start to emerge from the pandemic. And there's no better benchmark for how businesses are performing than the Quarterly Economic Survey. My colleagues Tim Major and David Bharier, the British Chamber of Commerce, will help to set out what the scale and the influence of these results actually mean, and some of the key institutions that actually take note of those conversations. Some reflections from me on the new partnership with BDO. Thank you to colleagues at BDO. You have helped to give this survey new reach and impetus. That's really important for me. It's important for the Chamber because it informs our work on behalf of the members, but also the British Chamber of Commerce that count on the local survey results to inform their work on behalf of all of the chambers, or 53 accredited chambers across the country. So I had a last point here, which was why is the QES so significant for the region right now? And for the football fans amongst us this morning, perhaps reading the mood of the nation, the conversation may not be such a challenge this morning, but after 16 months of restricted trade, barriers to growth, there does remain uncertainty for businesses, and we want this session to and the work that comes out of it to help, as I say, to inform your investment decisions. So, short introduction from me. I'm going to hand over now to Tim Major, my colleague at the Chamber, and he's going to help to steer us through the next 90 minutes. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, everybody. Nice to see you here this morning. Thanks for joining us, and welcome members, guests. It's all very nice of you to join us after perhaps those who were celebrating last night a little bit. Probably just worth starting off by talking about the Thames Valley and Chamber. It's worth mentioning in context of what we're going to talk about, actually the geographic reach of the Chamber. And this is for those of you that sit at different ends of the Chamber membership and where we are in the Thames Valley, where it all sits. I guess in the western reach is Swindon, then we go up through the M4, through Newbury and West Berkshire, Reading, Wokingham, Bracknell, Slough, then it shifts all the way up through Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire, and then joining that triangle, if you like, back down in the west side in Swindon. So it's in geographic reach, it's a big reach. Particularly like to thank BDO for their support for this event, and ongoingly as we go through the next 12 months at least, we'll be bringing this as a regular feature to you. And in fact, I've actually picked a strap off the BDO website, actually, which I think encapsulates what we should all be thinking about as we probably have had the worst economic period for us all in the last 18 months. I'm just going to read it off, and this is where I want you to adopt this in terms of those who are having a listening in, perhaps for the first time, to an economic style event. And I'll read this verbatim. It says, you and your business are operating in a new reality. Your supply chains, your workforce, your sales, and your financial health will have all been impacted. You may also need to check that your governance, risk management, and regulatory controls are all fit for purpose. Even if your business is managing to keep operating and maybe thrive, you'll be facing new challenges. And I think that's true. Anyway, let me just give you a bit of a round robin who we've got in the room, our virtual room, that is. We've got David Bharier, who is the head of research at the British Chamber of Commerce, whose job it is actually to handle all this QES. So welcome, David. Nice to see you. And then just to make my life really tricky, you've got another David Brookes at BDO. David is the head of tax in the Thames Valley here in Reading, leading a specialist team. David has expertise in MBOs, MBIs, and acting for private equity. So welcome, David. We also have in the room, we've got Claire Hawthorne, one of David's team, who's Director of Outsourcing and Business Support at BDO, leading the service team providing services to owner-managed businesses. But we've also got some stars, we've got some members in our midst as well. I'm pleased to welcome Mario Amato, who is Head of Group Business for White & Co. You can see what Mario does behind him there, but they are White & Co, UK's largest privately owned removal and storage company with over 145 years in the business. So welcome, Mario. We also have Paul Bobby, Managing Director of Whitehorse Plastics. Paul led MBO in 2018 of Whitehorse Plastics, and they are specialists in the development and production of injection moulding, and they can be found between Swindon and Oxford. So Paul, welcome to you. And finally, but by no means least, Nicola Hartland from Cybercrowd describes herself as a serial entrepreneur. She is the Chief Revenue Officer of Cybercrowd, a cybersecurity business based in Newbury, West Berkshire. So welcome to you, Nicola, and welcome everybody. But without further ado, if I could now hand over to David Bharier. Oh, one thing I would say, as questions arrive, as you pop them in either in the chat box or the Q&A, and I will pick them up, and later on I will run through those questions with you. I've received some questions from you already, so I've got them in a pile in front of me. So if you do see me looking down, apologies now, but I've got those questions waiting for you. David BCC, over to you.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here today. So what I'll do within the next 5 or 10 minutes is just go through some of the key headline results from the quarterly economic survey at a national level. Now, Paul mentioned that this is a significant piece of work for us. It certainly is. It's the UK's largest independent business survey. Hopefully you can all see my screen now. The British Chambers of Commerce cover 53 local chambers of commerce in the UK, as well as 73 chambers overseas. Now, Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce are at the larger end of the spectrum. They're a serious contributor to the network. And of course, when it comes to the quarterly economic survey, very important element given the volume of businesses in the region. The QES fundamentally sits within our wider research programme, and the objective of the BCC's research programme is really to understand what the issues are that businesses are facing across the UK and what policies need to be recommended to improve the business environment. That's fundamentally what we want to do here. And the quarterly economic survey is a major strand of that. We also have a package of thematic surveys that look at issues like skills policy, business taxation, international trade, Brexit. But the quarterly economic survey has been running since 1989 and is, in simple terms, just a very straightforward business survey that looks at how businesses have reported conditions within the quarter. It simply asks businesses in the last 3 months or in the next 3 months, how do you think things have gone or how do you think things are going? very straightforward. But when you aggregate it, you get some really interesting results, and it tracks against official data very nicely. So, for example, GDP data. So we can start to make more accurate predictions about what's actually going on in the UK economy. We use the data extensively. We brief the Bank of England. We speak to the Treasury Department on a regular basis to show them the data, as well as all the other relevant business departments. It's used by the Bank of England's monetary analysis team that feeds into the Monetary Policy Committee when they gather evidence to decide on the interest rates each month. So it's a serious piece of economic data in the UK. And of course, it would be nothing if it wasn't for the input from business members across the UK. So fundamentally, thank you to those that have filled in the survey, because this is the evidence on which we can try to understand the issues that businesses are facing and try to think about solutions. So the quarterly economic survey this quarter received 5,889 participants from across the UK. The profile of the people filling it in, who's filling in the survey, well, actually it fits the profile of the sort of people that are members of chambers of commerce. Overwhelmingly small and medium-sized enterprises, 94% in this occasion, but we obviously capture a huge amount of bigger companies as well. The sectoral split is about 25% manufacturing and 75% within the service sector. Now, since COVID started in March 2020, the service sector has really split into two segments in terms of performance: business to business and business to consumer, which would include hospitality, retail and catering, etc. And we've seen a massive divergence in how those two subsectors have performed, which I can get onto shortly. The field work for this survey, so when people filled it in, took place between the 17th of May and the 10th of June. So it just missed the announcement of the postponement of the 21st of June reopening. So that's something to consider. We took the survey just before that announcement of the postponement. So it may have had some impact, but also yesterday's result could have had an impact on how businesses think. Business confidence was already growing. There may have been an extra boost from yesterday. So short-term events can impact on the data. And what we're fundamentally tracking in the quarterly economic survey is change in domestic sales, change in export sales, cash flow, investment, attempted recruitment, turnover, confidence, price expectations. So we try and cover a wide range of indicators to give us a relatively clear picture of what businesses are, how businesses are performing in the quarter. Now, in terms of the headlines for this particular quarter, so Q2, what we've seen is actually the largest improvements in the indicators in this particular quarter since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. What that means is that more firms, quite a significant amount more firms, are reporting improvements in domestic sales, investment, confidence, etc. And improvements have actually occurred across the board and for all sectors. So whereas we've seen, for example, hotels and catering firms perform extraordinarily poorly over the last year because of shutdowns and lack of consumer confidence, etc., actually now, as the restrictions started to loosen, we've seen improvements even within that sector. However, I would caution an over-optimism here, because on paper, the data would look like it's like a return to pre-pandemic levels if you were to just look at the numbers. But of course, we're starting from the lowest base on record. As I'll show you in a second, the graphs indicate how far things slipped in Q2 2020. It was basically the worst quarter in the history of the quarterly economic survey. And that was borne out by the GDP data as well. And we don't get a sense also of the find the value, the financial value of the improvement. So that's one thing to bear in mind. We're just getting the general direction of travel. So we don't know the scale of the improvement. Firms that were completely shut last quarter may have reopened, seen a modest amount of revenue come in and report it as an improvement, which it would have been, but we don't really know the scale of that improvement. So where we've seen the highest levels of improvement are around domestic sales and some of the recruitment data that we collect. And I think that would correspond quite simply to the loosening of the restrictions domestically. So more activity has taken place within in the UK market, and now more businesses, and this is a key point actually, more businesses are going out looking for new staff, and we'll get onto that in a second. We've seen smaller rises in other indicators such as cash flow and export sales. And so what that means is that there's an improvement on the previous few quarters, which again were the worst on record, but it's not really a substantial improvement, and it's not where we would consider things to be healthy. Cash flow has really taken a hit. So we asked businesses, have you seen a change in your cash flow in the last 3 months? We're still seeing quite a significant proportion reporting that things are still getting worse. And that's as you might expect, because if you've been in shutdown, you don't have the revenue coming in, there's still outgoings to pay. And so that's had an impact on cash flow and therefore investment as well. Also, export sales have not come through very strongly this quarter either. And I think that's probably due to the ongoing seizing up of the international trade arena due to COVID primarily, but then at the start of this year, major changes flowing from Brexit, which has undoubtedly had an impact on a lot of manufacturers in particular. So these indicators haven't improved as well. But there's one final point that I would make around the headlines, and that is that inflation is really becoming quite a serious issue for a growing number of firms. So now we've actually seen the highest level of manufacturers reporting that they expect an increase in prices, and that's the highest level on record now, and that raw materials are seen as the primary cost driver for manufacturers. So we can get onto that shortly. So those are very much the general headlines. If we pick up just a couple of graphs just to illustrate what's going on here, when we look at domestic sales, this is what we see. We asked businesses in the last 3 months, have you seen an increase, no change or a decrease to domestic sales? As you can see in Q2 2020, record number of firms reporting a decrease in domestic sales. But this wasn't just domestic sales, every indicator went the same way. And that's entirely what you would expect if you enforce an economic shutdown. Subsequent quarters really didn't see a huge amount of improvement. There was still around almost half of firms reporting decreases in domestic sales. But now we're into Q2. I think there is a bit of a turnaround here. 44% of firms now are reporting improved domestic sales compared to 28% last quarter. So there is a material improvement in the proportion of firms reporting in increased sales. And when we look at the sectoral breakdown, I appreciate that the font's a bit small here, but I'll just talk through this very briefly. When we look at the sectoral breakdown, as I mentioned, hotels and catering firms have fared easily the worst since the start of the crisis. And this was the state of play in Q1. And in Q1 2020, even as recent as Q1, 83% of hotels and catering firms were reporting decreased sales. Things had shown no let-up in this sector at all since the start of the crisis. Whereas if you look at some of the more B2B service sector firms, professional services, lawyers, accountants, marketing, etc., they were a bit more likely to display a more balanced view of the quarter. It wasn't as bad. It was still not very good, but it wasn't as bad as some of the B2C side of things. So that was the state of play in Q1, but actually Q2, we've started to see an improvement across every sector, including hotels and catering firms. So whereas in Q1, only 7% of hotels and catering firms reported increased domestic sales, that's actually risen quite significantly to 38%. So there is an improvement across all of these sectors. But as I say, we're starting from an extraordinarily low base for some of these sectors. And so we have to look at the data in context with the other quarters. When we look at export sales, though, the improvement is not as clear. There's a slight improvement on the Q1 and the previous 2 quarters before that, but it's not particularly significant. So when we ask businesses what are the issues they face, particularly around trade, there's a range of issues that would explain this data. So these are direct quotes from businesses within the survey. And just to pick out a couple, you've got a service sector firm in Sheffield saying that duty charges on goods from the EU means and that the agreement doesn't cover country of origin. So that's an issue for that business. You've got another business in small manufacturer in East Lancashire saying that documentation charges alone are averaging €4,000 per month, and customers are being forced to pay documentation, incorrect duty and VAT at the point of contact if their goods are actually delivered in the chaos. So these are direct quotes from businesses, and I think this is a bit of a random selection, but some of this may explain why the export side of things hasn't improved as well. Still a lot of confusion and additional paperwork and costs associated with Brexit in particular, but international trade more broadly. And that also feeds into the inflationary pressures as well, which I'll touch on in a second. When we look at recruitment and employment, though, things have materially improved. So when we ask businesses if they've attempted to recruit in the quarter, what you find now is that just over half say that they're attempting to recruit. They went out to find new staff. And that's an increase on around 40% in the previous few quarters. So there are now more firms looking to recruit, and there's a higher percentage of firms within certain sectors looking to recruit as well, which is quite interesting. So for example, construction firms are much more likely to be looking to recruit. Manufacturers are more likely to recruit, transport and distribution, as you might expect, but also hotels and catering firms. And I pick out this particular sector, as I say, because it's been the worst affected by the crisis. But now you're actually starting to see an improvement to in recruitment intentions here. So there's been an increase across the board, and so too there's been an increase in the percentage of firms who are attempting to recruit also facing recruitment difficulties. And I think this is another theme from the survey. We've seen an increase in the percentage of firms facing difficulties to recruit for things like skilled roles, in the case of the manufacturing sector, skilled manual technical roles, professional managerial roles in the professional services sector, but also lower skilled roles within the consumer-facing sectors like hotels and catering. So you've seen a rise as well of recruitment difficulties across the board. But I say the recruitment indicators are quite positive. Here's another indicator that we use. This looks at the expectation that workforce will change in size over the next 3 months. So we ask businesses over the next 3 months, will your workforce increase, decrease, remain the same? Actually now 38% are reporting that they expect an increase, which is really positive when you consider that only 5% overall are expecting a decrease. So clearly the direction of travel this quarter seems to be that businesses are looking to expand in terms of their workforce and that they're going out and recruiting. So that, I think that shows an increased level of optimism clearly in the data. Finally, looking at investment confidence and inflation, this indicator that you're looking at right now looks at the expectation that business turnover will change over the next 12 months. So it's a wider time horizon, but what it shows is, being blunt, quite a high level of optimism, which is really positive. So 65% of businesses now expect turnover to increase in the next 12 months. And I think businesses are looking to the future now as the restrictions are loosening, and they're sort of taken out of the immediate distress mode that they've been in the last year. And many businesses now are clearly looking to growth in the next 12 months. If you compare that to the worst quarter on record, which was Q2 2020, 58% of businesses, so almost the opposite number, were expecting turnover to decrease. There was clearly widespread pessimism, I guess you'd call it, at the start of the crisis. But now, as we've moved out, or as we're moving out of the crisis, you start to see more and more firms expecting growth, which is positive. And again, the expectation of growth is across the board, so across all sectors, even within those that are most impacted. So again, this is a very positive news story. Every sector, without exception, overwhelming majority of those businesses in every sector expect their turnover to increase. So I think that's clearly really positive. But then when we look at inflation, I think this is, just to finish on a slightly more worrying note, I guess, this is where things have shifted, and perhaps for the worse. We asked businesses over the next 3 months, do you expect prices to change? The prices of goods and services, that is. And we've seen now 42% of businesses expect an increase in prices over the next 3 months, and only 3%, so virtually no businesses really within the margin of error, expect prices to decrease. So there's clearly, there has been an increase in this proportion, expecting an increase. And it seems to be very sectorally focused. So construction firms, manufacturers, retailers, to a slightly lesser extent, transport and distribution firms, they've got majorities now expecting price inflation over the next 3 months. Whereas if you look at B2B service sector firms, marketing, media, lawyers, accountants, they're far less likely to be expecting an increase. So this has clearly gone up. And when I won't go into too much detail on this particular slide, but when you map it into a line graph, this top right line graph here, you see that for the manufacturing sector, that price expectations indicator has now shot up to the highest level on record in the history of the quarterly economic survey. So clearly there's an expectation of a price inflation, particularly among manufacturers. So when we ask businesses what's going on, there's some really interesting examples, and it's almost overwhelmingly from manufacturers. And you see cases here, so I'll just pick out a couple at random. Manufacturer in mid-Yorkshire, they're saying that orders and quotes are only valid now for 24 to 48 hours, as opposed to a fortnight or a month. Shortage of raw materials are causing major delays and price negotiations. Other businesses, for example, this manufacturer in Suffolk, or this manufacturer in East Lancashire, are talking about 20 to 25% increases in raw material prices. Some businesses are citing even higher levels, 50% on some of the parts that this manufacturer in East Lancashire purchases. And so we're actually uncovering quite a serious issue here among manufacturers in particular around price inflation. And the Bank of England's view, as you may have seen in the press, is that inflation is transitory because it's not feeding at the moment into wage inflation. But I think our view may be that this needs a closer examination, because prices here, if they're going up by this amount, aren't necessarily likely to come back down anytime soon if there are structural changes in how prices are being managed. So this is one of the things that we're speaking to the Bank of England about. But that really, I think, covers most of the key headlines. So as again, to recap, positive quarter this quarter, highest levels of growth across the board. Some indicators have improved more than others, particularly recruitment and sales and confidence. But inflation is an issue, and I think that's had an impact on the export sales data as well. So I'll just pause there and pick up any questions if there are any after. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, David, there is actually a couple of questions. I'll just throw them in now rather than wait to the end, because I think they're very relevant to what you've just been talking about. I think you partially answered them, but it's probably just worth a recap. What do you think is driving the professional services, marketing and media sector growth?
That's a really good question. I mean, what we've seen since the start of the crisis is that this particular these collection of sectors have actually been able to weather the storm more than others because of home work, remote working, shifting operations online, moving in some cases to a pure online sales model. And so you've seen this sector show perhaps more resilience because they are able to work around the restrictions. So I think where we're seeing growth, it's a natural occurrence as restrictions loosen, where they're in a position that they've already been able to maintain operations generally in a better way than perhaps manufacturers and retailers.
Okay. And are you seeing the business optimism for growth in particularly in turnover based on increased online business and services sector rather than other sectors which are evidently struggling?
Yeah, it's difficult to say from the data at a general level, but I think clearly with professional services sector confidence clearly improving, I think that's probably going to be a combination of being able to shift business models to on sort of an online environment, but also to benefit from the loosening of the restrictions as more people come back into the office. Activity is probably going to be expected to go in one way, which is upwards. So you see a combination of factors probably for the professional services sector. For the retail sector, by contrast, it's probably a bit more simpler. The equation is probably simpler, which is any restriction on any loosening of restrictions on physical presence in shops and in hotels, restaurants, etc., will just naturally see sales go up.
Thank you, David. I think we will return to your good self very shortly, but I'd like to hand now to David Brookes from BDO. David, over to you.
Thank you, Tim. So I'm going to focus on the Thames Valley survey results, and responses from the Thames Valley in terms of themes were pretty similar to the national results. But interestingly, there are a few areas where the Thames Valley's performed better than the national average. And interestingly, 8% of Thames Valley businesses have seen UK sales or orders reduce in the last 3 months. So that's 8% compared to 20% nationally. And almost 50% have seen an increase in sales and orders, which is really encouraging. And it's good to see, a strong position against the national figures. No doubt helped partly because of the strong tech sector in the Thames Valley, and also a lot of B2B rather than B2C businesses we see in the Thames Valley. So I'm sure that helped the results in some ways. Only 22 and 23% of Thames Valley businesses, though, had seen overseas sales and orders increase, which mirrors what David's just told us about international trade. So there's some improvement possible there compared to UK growth, and I'll touch on international trade a bit more in a minute. In terms of cash flow, 39% of businesses have seen an increase over the last 3 months, and businesses seem ready to invest. So 28% investing in plant and machinery and 36% investing in training in the last 6 months. So, sorry, the last 3 months. So that's really good to see as well. Also, more than half have been recruiting staff, which is similar to the national position, the vast majority of which, about 3/4, are actually permanent full-time roles. So it's not just temporary staff, it's solid positions. But interestingly, 45% experienced difficulty in recruiting. And again, I'll come back to that point in a minute. If we look forwards to the next 3 months, 32% felt that their own prices would have to increase in the coming months. 79% expect their turnover to improve, and 65% expect profitability to improve in the next 3 months. So that's really encouraging figures from the local position. So overall, I think a very encouraging outlook and position at the moment in the Thames Valley. It's once again proving to be a very resilient area for businesses to operate, and a very strong position when you compare with the national position. And as I said, no doubt assisted by things like our strong tech sector, which has performed well during the COVID crisis. But we do need to remember that there are a variety of sectors across the Thames Valley, and obviously those in leisure and hospitality, high street retail, they have been severely impacted by COVID, and we shouldn't forget that. But just as in the national picture, that not everything's rosy, as David touched on, and so there are challenges for Thames Valley businesses. And the ones that came up in the survey were international trade, recruitment and skill shortages, general inflationary pressure, and taxation, which I found interesting as a tax partner, so I will talk about that in a sec. So in international trade, we're seeing our clients importing and exporting less, and there are various reasons for this. Some of it's COVID related. We found freight costs have really gone through the roof. Some container ships seem to be in the wrong places, and things like the bottleneck in the Suez Canal, I'm sure didn't help with that either. But there are also the Brexit changes. So those companies exporting and trading outside of the EU already are no doubt finding it easier to cope than those who have typically traded with the EU and are now finding significant changes in the way they can operate. And in the Thames Valley, obviously, we have a lot of businesses working closely with the US and even Japan, rather than always with Europe. So that may be why our stats are slightly better than the national average. But in the past, businesses could put goods in a van and drive over to France and be able to sell them. Obviously, that has changed significantly. And we've noticed that companies that have a large increase in domestic demand are continuing to focus on the domestic rather than go into the areas where it's proving more difficult in terms of paperwork and import and export documentation and so on. And our survey tells us that 46% of businesses are already operating at full capacity. So I think that probably indicates why would you put effort into a more difficult area of exports if you've already got a good, strong market locally. So that could be part of it. Now, I'm not a VAT and customs duty expert, although we do have them at BDO in our office in Reading as well. But we have noticed that to be an importer in the EU, you have to be established. And I think it was thought at one point that small businesses could use perhaps freight forwarders to take on this role, but there are difficulties with that, partly that they have to be jointly liable for any duty. They're already maxed out with work anyway, so why would they want to take on that responsibility? And so this is a challenge. And also businesses selling to individual customers in the EU, we're expecting an import one-stop shop to be in place by now with the EU, but that hasn't yet been sorted out. So the HMRC are conscious that things are a bit of a mess at the moment, particularly for smaller businesses to deal with, and hopefully that will improve soon. As far as recruitment and skill shortage, we are seeing right from our own business with professional staff to delivery drivers. I'm sure Mario will talk more about this, and waiting staff. There are challenges there. Some of that's due probably to people returning to the EU, perhaps because of Brexit or COVID or both. But also the new IR35 rules for off-payroll workers are also meaning, workers are looking at their tax positions increased. Do they want more money? Will they perhaps do a different job? So there are a lot of complex interconnected areas here at play. So it's something that we need to keep an eye on. Then inflation, this was a concern to 22% of our respondents, and it's not just wage inflation, as David said, it's raw materials as well. And the Bank of England do seem to initially have been satisfied it was a temporary short-term thing, but I've noticed in recent press reports in the Sunday Times and other places that there is now increasing concern that this might be more of a long-term position, because governments around the world have pumped money into the system to stimulate the economy, and that does have an inflationary effect. But obviously also increasing inflation will ultimately start to have an impact on interest rates as well. And many businesses have borrowed heavily to cope with COVID. The last thing they want if they're on a variable interest rate is for that interest rate to go up. So that's another thing that businesses need to be aware of. And then finally, taxation. It was raised as a concern by 20% of respondents, which as a tax partner doesn't surprise me. I've had a number of clients worried about this. We've seen the government pump billions of pounds into COVID-19 measures like the furlough scheme, and they've been pretty effective and worked well. But at some point, everyone realizes that government debt has to be paid back. And so businesses are concerned about who's going to bear this tax and when. And obviously, companies don't vote, so companies are often an easy target to increase tax rates. I think it was in the news the last couple of days that the OBR have said that the government will need to find an additional 10 billion a year for the next 3 years from either cuts or tax increases. And if you bear in mind that capital gains tax brings in about 10 billion a year as a whole, and inheritance tax brings in 5 billion a year, these are significant amounts of tax that need to be found. Now, in the last budget, the government do seem to be holding off tax increases for a while to allow the economy to recover, and they've borrowed at historically low interest rates, so that they're not under tremendous pressure at the moment. But obviously there have been a flag to increase in corporate tax rates. So for companies with profits of less than 50,000, the tax rate will stay at 19%. But from April 2023, if companies' profits are over 250,000, that rate will increase to 25%. So that's a significant increase in tax rate. Will VAT increase as well? That's no doubt something that will worry people, because again, that can be inflationary unless businesses selling to consumers can absorb some of that. That does have an inflationary effect. And entrepreneurs are often concerned about capital gains tax, whether they'll be impacted when they come to sell their business. That can affect M&A activity. But don't forget to make the use of the tax reliefs that we do have. So there's been a temporary increase to capital allowances from 1st of April 21 to March 23, giving 130% relief. And there are other reliefs that businesses can take advantage of as well. So don't forget those. So I think in conclusion, a really encouraging position for business. There are a few concerns to be aware of as well, though, as we've touched on. So make sure you do plan ahead if you can, potentially expecting a more inflationary, perhaps even a higher interest rate environment going forward as well. So there's some of the traps that we might need to look out for, and that's come out in the data that we've received. So that's it from me. I'll hand back to Tim for the panel discussion.
Thank you, David. That's very kind. There are some more questions coming in, but actually what I'm going to do is the next question I'm going to bring in both Claire and Nicola to this one, because I think there's certainly some correlations in what Nicola does and what Claire has experienced and Nicola has done. Particularly, I suppose for you, Claire, you deal with a broad spectrum of businesses from startups to mid-market. How have you found that your clients have adapted to this change throughout the lockdown period? And has this resulted, sorry, this is a longer question, resulted in significant changes in the way that they operate their business, whether that's data, recruitment, etc.?
Yeah, no, of course. And I think this was mentioned earlier in the results as well, and depending on the sector and the technology setup that the business has got, as to how they've managed to adapt to that. Are they using cloud solutions? How are they storing their data? How are they sharing information? And that's kind of a benefit for both the business and their advisors that they're working with. We've seen a lot of businesses have taken time to perhaps transition across to cloud technology, look at how they can streamline their business operations as well, and getting systems integrated and talking to each other. Another area we are seeing is obviously lockdown situation. A lot of businesses have moved to working from home. do they have breaks available in their leases? And we're seeing quite a lot of companies starting to exercise those break clauses and not actually taking on additional office space at the moment, using this time to kind of take stock of where they are, what do they need, can they adopt kind of agile working policies, and what's right ultimately for the well-being of their staff and their business moving forward. So there's kind of lots of different changes we're seeing there across systems, technologies and office space. And it's the constant uncertainty that we're not seeing businesses making firm decisions at this moment in time moving forward. It's kind of taking a midpoint and seeing how they can adapt to that for working in the future.
Perfect. Thank you. Bring Nicola into this one, because during the last sort of 12 months, not only have you started a new business, you sold a business, and then you're in this new business and you're expanding it. So you've seen dramatic changes just through your working environment on a day-to-day basis. Does that reflect some of the challenges that actually you've seen? Particularly, I know you've got recruitment and all this on your mind right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I can actually resonate because I've worked across a few different businesses with actually different challenges. Actually, one of the businesses that I was involved in was a manufacturing business that we set up in COVID, and keeping track of the raw materials, it was just like a moving target. And every single time something came down, we worked open book with our customers and passed that on. Certainly from my point of view, when I went through selling my tech business, that was an interesting challenge. And that was it was a data compliance business that we had, and at the start of last year, February 2020, we were due to go into the fitness industry, and we'd won a very large contract that was about to kick off in March. And at that very point, I mean, we've been working on that for 9 months, 10 months, and the whole thing literally overnight, it just wasn't going anywhere. So we had to work out, okay, what we're going to do, how are we going to restructure that business, and we put a plan in place for the following 6 months to develop a different strategy, come out the other side. We did have to use the furlough scheme to help out with that. And then once we came out kind of September, October side, we then had a new route. And it was that point I actually sold out of that business. I think especially with cybercrime, the cyber at the moment is booming. And the amount of cyber attacks have just gone off the scale, and I think that has really been a lot to do with the remote working. You have vulnerable members of staff, phishing rates, I think 47% of people are phished when they're working from home because they're vulnerable. They're not sitting in an office for someone to flag up that actually this is not legitimate. And I think from where we're sitting here is now growing and developing our team. And what comes to challenges with our business is recruitment. So that's a major challenge that we're facing, and we're developing a strategy to fix that.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. And that's one about constant change, isn't it, Nicola? Because it's I think as both David said, it's about constantly adapting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Perfect. I will come back to you guys in a bit, but I'd just like to bring in Paul Bobby, if I could, from Whitehorse Plastics, particularly, because as a manufacturer, I'm picking up the statistic, Paul, that 40% of businesses see increases in, and I know you've had to adapt hugely, both in the way that you manufacture, and I'm talking about your day-to-day stuff, as well as your orders and the ingredients and the costs and things like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, we've been through a fair journey from sort of grinding to a halt in March to being very excited at the recovery in September, to sort of facing a whole new set of challenges sort of Q2 onwards this year. And I think the sort of the key issues for us are, as I said, I share the optimism of the survey of the demand is there. But our key issues have all been really sort of supply chain driven. Raw material price inflation, as referred to earlier, is significant. From whether it's cardboard boxes or polymer, in some instances we're seeing increases of close on 100%, and historic highs have never been seen before. But to be fair, that's one issue. We have to work closely with our suppliers and customers to navigate our way through there. But probably this has all been driven through demand exceeding supply. So I think possession is 9 tenths of the law, and we're working really, really hard with our supply chain to ensure that that we are able to maintain our manufacturing capability. So interesting times. Demand's good, feel very positive, but I mean, supply chain issues right across the board, I know it's not unique to us, are quite challenging, and quite where and when they will resolve was, if I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be sat here. But and I think going back to the Bank of England's view that inflation is a blip, then I tend to share the view that I can't see it being a blip. It's got to, in the end, sort of cascade down and become a reality. But hopefully, hopefully that won't manifest itself to a worst case scenario.
Because I think you're seeing, aren't you, in your particular business in plastic moldings, that some of the raw ingredients you actually can't get, and having to adapt your contracts as well for your customers in a way that you never thought you'd have to. But that's about what an MD should be thinking about, I guess. Yeah,
as I said, luckily we have been able to maintain supply, but that, as I think I've mentioned to you before, Tim, is we took decisions Q4 last year as a sort of Brexit offset strategy to put significant inventory and raw material into the UK that comes in from the EU ahead of Brexit. And little do we know that in the end, Brexit, much as it brings a whole load of challenges and difficulties, that ended up being a good decision for other reasons, because we were able to manage the much longer lead times that were now being declared by our suppliers, because we actually had months and months of raw material in stock. But the availability is very scarce at as I said, on multiple levels. As I said, people refer to it quite often as a bit of a perfect storm of circumstances, and that seems to be coming through. So at the moment, I can't see it's not getting better. Prices. We've renegotiated. We took last year as an opportunity to renegotiate with our key automotive customers some different contractual terms that allowed us to be to basically have a sort of a quarterly price review, which certainly in the automotive supply chain is quite unheard of, but everyone's had to get real. So prices are only going one way at the moment. But I've had to stop worrying about telling my customers that product might take a bit longer and it might cost a bit more. I've just got to be honest and straight, and most of my customers are frustrated but understanding.
That's a thing, isn't it? Over the years, we've never liked to tell our customers about price increases, is it ever?
No, it's not a great conversation, but no one can ignore it, put their head in the sand, otherwise they'll be disappearing out of business. And from our point of view, we're here for the long term, and we'll get through this along with our customers and our suppliers.
I just come back to David at BDO. You seeing that picture across your client base as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Paul's been telling us.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's those that have traded predominantly with the EU that are finding some of those difficulties. But certainly the price increases. I mean, one thing we've been talking to clients about, which Paul touched on there about price reviews, is if you've got long-term contracts, make sure that you do have something in there that allows you to adapt pricing. We've been in a fairly benign environment for inflation and interest rates, and a lot of companies have probably got used to that position, but obviously things are changing, so make sure new contracts are adapted to cope with that.
Perfect, thank you. And I know that I'm going to come to Bharier next, if I may, because actually a lot of it, you as the UK's largest mover and Europe as well, all the things that Paul Bobby's been talking about is obviously caused by a certain event that happened at the beginning of this year called the Brexit and what have you, which may have been mentioned in the last few years also. But as someone who moves more than anything, you are very much a barometer of the economy, and you're seeing, I'm guessing, some of this reflected in what you see each day with movement both domestically and European.
Right. First of all, celebrations are in order for us because we just went into our 150th year. So it's our birthday last week. Something to celebrate down the road when we can. Just to give you a little bit of a perspective, although we are UK based, our spread grows across Europe, Europe to the UK, pan-European traffic, and cross-continental. We do close to 17,000 removals a year. So the perspective that I'm going to give you isn't just about UK domestic, it's European work and also pan-continental. The sectors that we serve are the private, meaning you and I when we need to move across the UK or migrate to Australia or elsewhere, the public sector, including the MOD, and corporate, which is what we're discussing today. We've been facing a couple of issues, a couple of challenges, one triggered by COVID-19 and the other one which created a double whammy, which is Brexit. Last year, COVID-19 fundamentally created an issue in terms of productivity because we had an initial lockdown, and then when we came out of it 7 weeks later, there was a pent-up demand. So the meeting that demand became a challenge. And towards the third quarter, we had a significant increase of European work for corporations that were migrating their personnel to Europe before the December 31st deadline. Literally to the degree where we had convoys of trucks heading out to Europe before the 22nd of December. Now, January onwards, the biggest issue that we and anyone that is in the mobility sector or relocation sector is that Europe obviously reinstated customs regulations. And customs regulations impacted entry of household goods. Unfortunately, many of the customs borders were not prepared for it, meaning they were not properly geared to handle importation coming from the UK when for 40 plus years they never had to do it. So that was our biggest challenge. By clearing customs, it increased transit times. In addition to that, because of the significant departure of drivers, especially Eastern European drivers from our sector, we had issues in meeting and obviously meeting the demand and having the ability to move shipments across Europe. We lost quite a few Polish and Romanian drivers. And that exodus started about a year ago, and it probably continues to some degree. So we had shortage of drivers. We had customs regulations that we had to implement again, therefore creating a delay, therefore creating an additional cost. And that cost had to be passed on to the client. That is just for the European sector. For international, i.e. cross-continental, I know one other member mentioned the cost of freight. Freight has jumped to an incredible amount. To give you an example, we had a shipment coming out of Singapore to the UK, and typically the freight on a 40-foot container is $3,000. It was charged $12,000 for the same 40-foot container. So we've seen dramatic increases in freight. We've seen a shortage of containers, actual containers, and a shortage of vessels that can carry them. And therefore, a disruption in transit times, congestion in the ports, et cetera, et cetera. So we are working towards hopefully a better future, but realistically, these challenges will continue because the Brexit impact is going on as we speak. We're moving and quite a significant number of people coming out of the financial sector, the City of London, into Europe to the benefit of 2 or 3 European countries. And we see very little return. That's our biggest concern, because although we're having a phenomenal year in terms of our results, where our concern is we don't have the comeback, meaning if we're going to move 100 families to Europe, we would hope that 30 to 40 or 50 will come back, and it's not happening. That's the biggest issue. Sorry, I just lost.
So that was
I didn't hear that, Tim, sorry.
quite insightful, because I assume actually after the end of last week, your national work suddenly is that changed as well with the end of the stamp duty?
Correct. The national work, well, actually it started last year, because when they implemented the stamp duty holiday, our national work boomed, absolutely boomed. In fact, to this day, you'll be hard pressed to find a removal company just to move within the UK until probably September. At the moment, we're booked until September, to give you an example. And yes, our domestic activity is the biggest sector out of the 17,000 moves that we do. The next in line is Europe. That's our largest market outside of the UK. And finally, the United States and Asia for the rest of it. But the UK domestic has absolutely skyrocketed. So
it's a quite change. And perhaps I'll just come back to David from the BCC. Do you like to add anything around that sort of statistic that Mario has been talking about there?
Yeah, so price rises, big challenge clearly. I mean, in general terms, we've seen, if you look at certain sectors, wholesale, retail, they're talking about delivery times increases, price rises to goods. It's probably quite limited in other sectors. So professional services don't tend to be talking about structural price rises. They're more likely to have kept cash flow moving, kept goods and kept services running, etc. So we're seeing quite a big divergence in some of the sectoral performances now.
Okay, perfect. And David, Brookes, do you want to add anything to what we've heard there from Mario and David from BCC?
Yeah, just on the professional services side, obviously that's our business, and you know there's huge increases in regulatory requirements on our industry, which pushes up the requirement for people and for time, particularly in the audit sector, for instance. And I think obviously every time there is a downturn or something like COVID, all the large firms stop their recruiting and training and then immediately regret it a few months later when we need more people. So I think those kind of things can have an inflationary impact as well.
Perfect. And I suppose actually quite a lot of the questions just coming back to labour. And I think much of the QES confidence pivots on how quickly employment recovers in the coming months. You know, our own survey predicts meaningful improvement if wages keep gaining. However, the survey displays labour shortages. Explanations include mismatched skills, inability to work because of, say, health concerns or childcare needs. I guess, and I'll come to David at BCC, do you think, and I'll open it up to the panel as well, do you think that the end of the furlough scheme actually will begin to resolve some of those labour concerns as perhaps people are freed up, perhaps?
It's a really interesting question that we're trying to grapple with as well. I think if you look at recruitment in the same way as you look at inflation, for example, there seems to be a convergence of a wide range of factors playing into this. So with inflation, there's all kinds of issues, from delays to shipments of goods to raw material costs going up, etc. There's a range of factors going into inflationary pressures. Likewise, there seems to be a range of factors going into recruitment difficulties as well. I think furlough actually seems to have emerged slightly more as an issue for some businesses, what I would probably describe as a minority, as perhaps tying up labour now in a way that it wasn't doing before, because it was such a lifeline for job support. That was the fundamental objective: maintain jobs. Now, I think for some businesses, it might be being seen as a drag on recruitment activity. But also, you look at the changes to the immigration system, for example, you've got perennial skill shortages in certain sectors. If you go to, I mean, the sort of businesses that come back to us consistently, even pre-pandemic, with skills issues were at the higher end of the skills spectrum, advanced manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, etc. These problems were always there. And then you've got the seasonal labour issues that might emerge now, given the changes to the immigration policy. So I think there's probably a range of factors playing into this. Identifying a single cure or a single factor as the driver, at least, might be a bit of a challenge. So what we're trying to do is get to grips with the individual concerns that businesses have got and look for resolution, at least at a sectoral level, because I don't think we're going to see a sudden, well, we won't see a policy solution for businesses in general, given the diverse nature of the problem.
And do you think it, if you like, the positive momentum that everybody's reported across the Thames Valley, and of course the national picture is very positive, but do you think that the vibe, for want of a better expression, coming from the QS is likely to lose that momentum when the furlough scheme ends?
It's tricky. I mean, we've always tried to, well, since the start of the furlough scheme, we've tried to assess how many businesses are using it and what might happen if there is an end to the furlough scheme. And I think certainly for some sectors that aren't fully recovered, particularly around hospitality, but also the travel industry, which is clearly going to take far longer to recover than other sectors. Furlough has been essential, and if you ask those sort of businesses what might happen if you no longer have furlough at the worst end of the spectrum, but at the minimum there's going to be a tapering approach to the contributions that employees have to put in now. I think that the impacts will be negative, but if you look at certain sectors that are clearly on a growth trajectory, both in terms of expansion of workforce but also increased revenue now due to loosening restrictions, I think actually the furlough scheme's probably served its use, and many businesses in those sort of sectors that are able to fully reopen probably would look, they would see furlough as perhaps a bit of a drag.
Okay.
But I think you're going to get a real sectoral mix here.
I think you're right from what we've seen from the survey results. David, BDO, what have you got anything to add? Because you've got obviously a broad spectrum of clients that you're advising as well.
No, I think similar to what David said. I suppose the only other observation is that some of the lower paid roles where people have been on furlough and perhaps haven't spent very much and maybe repaid some debt and are not overly motivated to go back to work again. So it will be interesting when that is finally pulled, whether that will be an impetus for those to re-enter the market. But some people have actually benefited from the lockdown period and haven't spent very much money, and some people do seem to be slow to return to the workplace.
Okay, and Paul, Bobby, I know your business, and I think a couple of the other you have mentioned the use of the furlough scheme. Are you planning and looking ahead to the end of the scheme itself in the autumn? Paul, you're on mute, by the way. Sorry, my favourite expression of the year.
There you go.
You're in.
Yeah, as I said, we've utilised the furlough scheme as it was intended for job retention from last March onwards. But no, I mean we're hopefully returning to a degree of normality, and the tapering off of the furlough scheme is fingers crossed it's not going to impact us, because we're expecting to return, or we have near enough return to normal demand. And as I referred to earlier, the only thing that slowed us down in the last quarter was supply chain issues stopping us, or particularly in the automotive world. As I said, we're key in automotive. The automotive sector in Q2 has been significantly slowed down, predominantly through a lack of sort of silicon chips, etc. But that does look like there is a sort of at least a resolution. So going forward, I mean, the furlough scheme does have to come to an end. The way it's tapering down is appropriate. We feel it's done exactly as it was expected, exactly as it was intended to. It's allowed us to maintain 95% of the jobs that we had when we went into this at the beginning of March last year. So we're very grateful for it and prepared for its end.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. A question, and I'll bring in Mario and David from BDO here about customs documentation, particularly. And customs documentation processing post-Brexit has exposed new business opportunities for some and an additional overhead for many. Is it perceived to be a long-term view, Mario, I promised I wouldn't use this expression, or a new normal, apologies, that will impact inflation, or a shorter term and transitional headache that can be overcome?
Shall I start with that? It's not going to be a short term. This is a definitive action. We will clear customs every time we move across to the continent. The good news is since January, it's gotten significantly better. Everyone that needs to clear customs, they have to use a freight forwarder or a customs broker, more specifically, at point of delivery. And as long as the documentation is in order, which is the tricky part that we faced at the beginning of the year, is what is the documentation? That was the biggest challenge for us. Now has cleared up. So we have identified since January, obviously customs points in every country that we go to. But the requirements for the documents have been around for decades. It's just that they're being re-implemented. So it is long-term. It is a fixed tariff to clear, meaning the actual process of clearance. But what is the bigger challenge is obviously if there are duties and customs duties and taxes, which in our line of work, generally, they're not applicable, because if you're moving from the UK to France or anywhere in the EU, fundamentally, as long as you can prove that you're acting as in capacity of a removal based on a professional transfer, then you don't have to pay any duties and taxes. However, when we do need to pay duties and taxes, that's where the big challenge comes, is defining the commodity and finding out what the cost of those duties and taxes are to be paid on arrival or prior to arrival. So that will be there forever after, for as long as we are outside of the EU.
And hopefully we'll just get better at it. What about you, David? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think I'd echo what Mario said. I think there are two aspects which we always knew with Brexit. One is any actual customs duty that might need to be paid or suffered, but also just the non-tax issue of just the drag and the time taken to deal with paperwork and just slow things across the border. So, that all costs additional amounts of money. If you're a larger, well-established business, you can probably factor that in. For some SMEs, if you don't have a presence in Europe, then it is more difficult, because you've got to figure out how to deal with the import side of documentation, getting things into a country. And so we are finding that some of the SMEs are just shying away from, if the amount of transactions are too small, it's just, in the too difficult box. Whereas perhaps for businesses like Mario who've got a presence in EU, that helps. And also the fact you're perhaps a bit larger and you're used to dealing with paperwork for non-EU countries already, that helps as well. So there is a whole range. I think it will improve as everybody gets used to the paperwork, but it won't go away. As Mario said, some of it will stick as a permanent change.
Perfect, thank you. And as an advert for the Chamber, if you have problems with your paperwork out there, our own international team are probably the best in the business, so you can come and talk to us, but not me, I have to be said. A general question for I think this one, start off with the two Davids on this one, if I may. Last month, inflation rose from 1.5 to 2.1, highest for 2 years, and reported in our our survey. Some experts say that a rate rise could be a warning to the economy that's running into trouble, whereas others say it's just because the economy is starting to grow. What do you say? What's your predictions? I love that question about predictions because it's a horrible one, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I'll go first. I predict, as you say, since COVID kicked off, predict all bets are off, really. But I think this is a complicated one. I think we're into a bit of new territory here. There's probably a large part of inflationary pressures caused by the reopening process, increased demand, shortage of supply, the natural occurrence of shortage supply because demand's so high in some cases. But I think the challenge might be is if some of the structural changes to raw material costs or international trade flows mean that prices go up in certain sectors, then that starts to feed down the chain into higher prices for customers. The big telltale sign will be whether wage inflation starts to creep up. That indicates more structural inflation. But the challenge will then be to do what to do with interest rates, as I think David mentioned earlier. If you've got lots of businesses in debt due to COVID, you don't want a rapid increase in the base rate if you're on a variable loan. So it's going to be a really tricky one. I think my prediction, therefore, would be some of this might be offset by a natural cooling down of the economy after the initial rush, but who knows if there's longer term inflation built in.
Okay. Thank you, David. BDO.
Yeah, I think some of it is temporary, but some of it will also stick. I think some of the raw materials and, you know, as we said, things reopening and difficulties getting supplies of things naturally pushes price up because people are desperate to get hold of materials. The wage inflation, I think there's always a sort of human behaviour element to it, and I think, you know, people have been locked in their homes. They've been frustrated, they've not been able to go on holiday, and in some ways the only thing that they feel they might be able to change is perhaps a change of job to get a change of, and I do think, you know, in some industries, you know, particularly if someone else is offering slightly more money, then, you know, there's that kind of human feeling that they want to be able to have something in their control that they can change. So I think we might see a short-term movement around of people around the industries, and then hopefully that will start to level off and things will get back to normal again.
Perfect. Thank you, the two Davids. Actually, I didn't mean to pair the next two again, but if I come back to Nicola and Claire, if I may. And for background, the question is around, you know, as businesses want to expand and grow, and I know, Nicola, you've got a new, you know, you had a search for new premises, and I know, Claire, you've particularly, with your huge spread of businesses that you deal with, from, as I say, that sort of startup to mid-market, what challenges have each of you seen in the way that you've tried to grow your businesses and working with businesses? In your case, Claire, what have you seen the main challenges, and whether that's around property or just some of the issues we've already spoken on? I'll come to Claire first, please.
Yeah, definitely seeing not challenges on property. I think people just holding fire on making decisions on property. Certainly, as I said earlier, we're seeing breaks being exercised, but then nothing committed to at the moment. As businesses are looking to adapt their working policies, so do they have more of a flexible, agile working policy? One area we have seen with businesses as well is where employees are perhaps looking to work internationally. So maybe they've got family that live abroad and they're looking to move there. And although that seems great, you know, you can have a policy of you can work anywhere you want to, that does also bring some potential tax challenges with it. So we'd recommend anyone that is thinking of doing that with their staff place, they consult with their advisors before they do so. cash flow wise, we kind of saw the initial lockdown, initial kind of reaction was just a, you know, what spending can I cut? What can I look to save money on? But after that initial kind of reaction now, we're seeing certainly across our client base that businesses are starting to monitor cash flow more than ever. You know, we've talked a bit about the hospitality and leisure sector in particular, having to adapt and make lots of changes as they reopen. But I'm seeing confidence is improving. Part of that, I think, is linked to obviously government support that's been provided, and it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of months those businesses that took out CBILS loans or bounce back loans, those repayments are going to start happening soon because they've had the initial period where the interest is being paid by the government, and they've perhaps had that first year with no loan repayments. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with as businesses are starting to factor that into their cash flow, or some clients I know I've been talking to kind of took the bounce back loan as it's available, I'm going to take it just in case, hold it to one side, and actually when I'm due to start making repayments, if I can, I'm just going to repay the total amount, but I have that safety net really. So I think these next couple of months are going to be really interesting to see how that plays out with the reliefs.
Perfect. And I know, Nicola, your business has expanded and we're looking for physical new premises. How was that search? Was it good, bad, indifferent? Tell us about it.
Well, I must admit, actually, I mean, we always, before COVID, we had physical offices where the team was based there, our technical team and our sales team. And actually, it was incredibly good timing because the renewal of the lease was actually last February. So we decided not to renew that, and we'd been operating the business remotely. And due to the expansion, I mean, our business has doubled in size in the past 12 months, just due to the demand for cybersecurity support. And we made the decision as a business that we wanted to have a physical base. Even though we're offered the hybrid of working, we felt that actually, in particular for sales teams, the feedback, we spoke to members of our team, that actually having somewhere to go for team days or having that opportunity to be able to actually, you know what, I want to go into the office today. There's been a lot of talks around mental health and actually going back into the workplace and anxiety. And, you know, I think actually offering that flexibility to our team has been very, very well received. So it's, you know, we're opened up centre of Newbury, that was June time, and now we're seeing actually, at first everyone couldn't believe it when you're going on the Teams call and you're back in the office, you know, and now we have clients that are wanting to come and see us, and we've arranged a team day for September, which is great. I would say our biggest challenge in our business is because of the growth, we obviously needed more staff. Over the past year, there's been a huge increase. I mean, there's an additional 21% of cybersecurity firms that have popped up to reach the demand, and having extra competition was never our problem, and isn't our problem. It was our business is scaling so rapidly that it's finding the team to be able to deliver those projects. And before, you know, recruitment was fairly straightforward. We did a lot online. We've got an in-house HR team, HR director, who are fantastic. We'd look at CVs, go through the normal drill, select our candidates and make an offer. And COVID has turned the war for talent on its head, really. And we had to adopt a different strategy. So people were no longer flocking to us. In addition, there was more competition. People are offering jobs. And so we developed a marketing approach. So we developed marketing campaigns about our company, about our jobs. We hired a PR agency in. We did a big social media post on, if you look at any of our social medias and Cybercrowd, we have features of our team, our capabilities, our culture. We used our own personal networks, especially on LinkedIn, to go and find staff. And equally, we widened the net, because initially it was pretty much Thames Valley. And because of technology and because of the new way of working, we could now search nationally. Which then offered us to get additional skilled workers in other places of the country. So that's how we're managing to do it, and that's how we managed to overcome the shortage. And yes, it's constantly, now we've got a marketing approach, our challenge is now thinking up new ideas to keep attracting new people.
There's always a challenge, isn't there? Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you both. Thanks very much. We're coming to the end, but I've still got a couple of questions, and I'll actually come to David at BDO and actually the other David as well. The government's levelling up agenda, what does it mean for the Thames Valley? That's a great question, isn't it? David from BDO.
I don't think we've got anything particularly to fear from that. I think, you know, the Thames Valley is in a very strong position, skilled workforce, great communication links. So we already have those things. I think, you know, as there's some levelling up in other parts of the country, they'll you know, hopefully get some of the benefits that we've got locally here, and they'll also be able to grow. But it's not something I fear. I think it will just help the whole country to improve rather than, you know, increase. It's not like one of those whack-a-moles where you improve something in one part and then it decreases in the Thames Valley. I think we can all benefit.
Perfect. And David, BCC, anything to add to?
Yeah, well, as David said, I mean, Thames Valley is already quite blessed in the sense that it's got the infrastructure in place. Heathrow, obviously, at its doorstep, high proportion of advanced manufacturing and science-based firms, you know, software producers, etc. So really, I think the levelling up is going to be most crucial in parts of the country that probably have less in the way of infrastructure. So where you've got historical imbalances in infrastructure, particularly rail and road networks. If you think about, going back to the 60s, the beaching cuts, those sort of communities that have lost access to sort of high quality infrastructure, that's probably where the focus needs to be. Obviously, big infrastructure pipelines that were in the pipeline before COVID came. Heathrow expansion obviously being a major one, HS2, East-West Rail connecting Cambridge to Oxford. These are the sort of projects that typically help generate growth, because not only do you get the benefits of the project being built itself for the local communities, but then you've got enhanced connectivity, regional regeneration, etc. So it's going to be dependent on the unique issues that each region of the UK has.
Perfect. And at that point, the questions are exhausted. You'll be pleased to know. It just remains for me to thank you all for coming on and sharing your expertise, your advice, and your experiences. Because actually, important thing for everybody on the call today, and those watching, I guess, on the YouTube afterwards, is actually take away some little nuggets that you can put into your business and operate on a day-to-day basis. For me, that's the end. But I'd like just to hand back to Paul Britton, the Chief Executive of the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, to finish off.
Well, Tim, thank you. Always great to hear colleagues at the British Chamber of Commerce putting into their own words what a great community the Thames Valley is. You can imagine there's a bit of intra-competition between myself and the other business communities out there across the accredited networks. Thank you for that, David. Thank you so much. I mean, we as a network focus on practical, real-world examples. I think that was always at the heart of what we were trying to do for the audience today. And this is a new venture for us. So again, going back to David at the BCC, I hope to see some Thames Valley comments and insights in that national pitch you're giving. It's all important to those influencers in Her Majesty's government as well. Mario, really, your comments really struck me. Obviously, your situation is not unique. All the evidence is pointing to longer-term infrastructural changes across the EU. That also reflects the striking volume of inquiries that we have had as a chamber throughout all the false dawns of Brexit, in particular over the last 7 months around customs. We are a customs broker, and we have hundreds of businesses that have been attending those webinars as well, and that is likely to continue until we get some more clarity for some of those continuing problems. your input and contribution, ladies and gents, and that's from the panelists, or for those of you in the audience that have filled in the survey, is absolutely crucial for us. It's also crucial for the British Chambers of Commerce. So I wanted to give you the date to mark in your diary. The next QES starts on the 23rd of August. So we'll be coming to you again as a team to ask for your thoughts on how your businesses are performing. Please respond to those. Let's make it a habit in terms of please, because this seminar will rerun again on October the 13th. And again, we'll be looking at the contrast between the region and between the UK. And my final thanks go to all of the team at the Chamber, because this has been a new venture for us. And there's an opportunity cost to focusing on this activity and others. 32 members of staff at the Chamber, and they've applied their shoulder to this as an initiative. This session has really hit the mark for me, everything that I had hoped for, and I hope that you as an audience have got some thoughts, provoked your thoughts, and given you some insights that you can also apply into your business. That's the main thing for us. The QES is open to our members, but also to every business across the community. So if you're listening in, you think that was helpful, speak to your supply chain, speak to your customers, engage them in the QES process. It'll all add weight to the Thames Valley and our efforts here. Thank you, Tim, for hosting. Thank you again to all of our panelists, to all of you for joining us today, and enjoy the week coming up. All the best. Thank you.